All right, so there was a lady by the name of Monica Parker, and she wrote a book, and it's called OMG, How Children See God. And it records the answers to what children said a lot of things about God, but one of them was, what does God look like? And some of the responses were this. One 7-year-old by the name of Shane said, God is like a transformer. He can turn himself into anything he wants. God doesn't sleep because he watches over us all the time, said a 9-year-old named Kelly. And a 9-year-old named Gabby said, God has giant ears so that he can hear everything that we're saying. Now, there's actually probably at least a little bit of hidden accuracy to some of those thoughts that those children had. I'm not sure that God actually resembles Optimus Prime or Bumblebee, but I can see how he could be viewed any way that he wants to be viewed. At times he showed himself to people through a still small voice, and other times in a gushing and dynamic wind, and so on and so forth, helping each person to see the attributes of him that he wanted them to focus on or to see or to understand at that time. And besides, God says truthfully that he's actually spirit. He doesn't necessarily have any kind of human form that we might wish we could really be able to picture. Yet I'm going to tell you something that's really, really interesting we'll see today. There's a passage in Daniel, and then there's also one possibly in Revelation. They give us a pretty good picture of maybe what God looks like. And it takes place in Daniel chapter 7 during a vision or a dream that Daniel was having. And this is what it says, Daniel 7, 9, 10. And Daniel says in his dream, as I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. And the court was seated, and the books were open. So what do you think about that? Is that how you pictured God? Well, in this situation, God is seen right on his throne, and he's described as the Ancient of Days. That name for God fits really, really well with what Daniel was supposed to see of God's attributes in the remainder of the passage. The name denotes things like his age and his dignity and God's wisdom and the ability to make good judgments. White clothing would do really well to show God's purity and God's perfection. The white hair like wool would demonstrate the wisdom in decision making that God would have. A throne flashing with fire showed how terrifying and worthy of respect the one on the throne was. The wheels that were ablaze meant that the throne was not just a stationary power, if that makes sense, but that God has power over all things and should have the respect of all living creatures everywhere. The river quite possibly shows God's power and his ability to make his decisions happen. And the amount of people or creatures that are attending to him demonstrate just really God's greatness and value to be worshipped. And it all closes out, right? Showing God as this ultimate judge, where everyone is judged according to his wisdom and his knowledge, which is perfect. And it shows that by showing that it's contained in the books that no one can deny. It's written in those books. Really, it's quite the picture. But the whole hair and white clothes really doesn't tell us what God looks like, but rather the whole scene helps us understand what God wanted that group of people to recognize about him or to focus on about him. That he has the right to judge them, the wisdom to make absolutely perfect judgments, and the power to bring about all consequences that come as a result of his judgments. Now, some of us need to see God that way. And all of us at times have or have needed to see God that way. But that's not really a full picture of God, nor is it meant to be. God is so much more that no painting, no paragraph could contain all that God is. And there are times when God just simply shows himself to us as mercy. Thank goodness, right? And sometimes God shows himself to us simply as love. Remember the cross of Jesus Christ that saves us from having to go to a judgment scene like the one that's portrayed there in the book of Daniel. And you know what I'm thankful for? I'm thankful for this. That we have a God that is so big and he's so wonderful and he's so amazing that we actually could never picture him. I'm really grateful for that. But we also have a God that's so wonderful and amazing that he cares just so much for each of us that he reveals himself to us in just the way that we need him to reveal himself to us at that time. Sometimes I suppose he reveals himself as the transformer, right? The one who can help us through anything. And sometimes God shows himself as the one who can't sleep because there's so many times we need him to be awake with us during one of our nightmares. And sometimes we see God reveal himself to us as the God with giant ears, I suppose, because we need his listening ears. Either way, there's one thing you can be sure of, and it's this: that God is perfect, and he is everything you need. And he is constantly trying to show himself to you in ways that you need him to show himself to you the most. Just keep opening your ears, your eyes, and your hearts to him, and he'll keep revealing himself the way he needs to and you need him to. We'll see you tomorrow.